and this is where the crazy part happens. He said, "You will see the beginning of this war take place by the end of this year, when Bin Laden and his boys blow up the World Trade Center." Most people kind of have written Al Bielek off as a kook. Even I almost did. But I had a phone call with him in 2001, before 9/11, shortly after I graduated college in May 2001. I believe the phone call took place between June, July, or August. And it was a long distance call, I believe, so somewhere there is evidence of this phone call taking place. I believe I spoke with him for about 2.5 hours on the phone. So I had written this 8-page letter to the webmaster of Bielek or albielek.com about how Al Bielek had enhanced the conversations and minds of myself and my friends. On the weekends, we used to get together on my dock and discuss all the topics that we would hear Al Bielek talk about in his lectures, interviews, and TV appearances throughout high school and college. And I just wanted to thank him for the concepts that he had introduced us to. It was a really good, heartfelt letter. You know, I had graduated and I thought that I had to start behaving like an adult. That I needed to grow up and kind of walk away from conspiracy theory, and which really means surrendering all of your interests and all the things you're passionate about. Become a society-driven cow. Then become a cloned-out zombie and blend into society, serving the state or serving your corporate master, and put my head in the sand instead of paying attention and following my spirit and thoughts of learning more and more about conspiracy theory and how the world really works, and losing everything about yourself and becoming what society wants you to be. Anyway, it was like about an 8-page letter, and the guy liked the letter so much that he called Al Bielek and read it to him on the phone. And Al Bielek liked it, and he said, "Have that young man give me a call." And so Mr. Hautzager emailed me back with Al Bielek's phone number and said that Al would like to have a discussion. And man, I was so fired up about that. So I could barely sleep that night. I was so excited in anticipation of the idea that I was going to get to talk to Al Bielek on the phone. I barely slept, and I didn't really have any ideas planned to talk to him about. I just figured I'd call him and let it take off from there. I wish I had set aside some questions that I had wanted to ask, but I just didn't have the mindset back then to properly plan for such a meaningful conversation that I was going to have. But it didn't matter. The conversation turned out to be probably the most intriguing conversation I've ever had in my life. The next morning, I literally paced for about 10 minutes, like trying to get up the courage to call Al Bielek. It's kind of funny thinking back on it, but man, I was like, I had purchased from the webmaster a 24-hour audio CD of interviews with Al Bielek about his life and all of the experiences that he had: time traveling, Philadelphia experiment, Montauk Project, interacting with extraterrestrial alien beings, and other projects. So I finally picked up the phone and started dialing. It's funny because now I would call him in a heartbeat, no problem. But like back then, I was, I guess, 21 years old, and I dialed him, and man, he picked up the phone, and I heard his voice, and it was just like hearing the CD. In fact, like as I'm talking to him on the phone, I'm like, man, it sounds so much like I'm just listening to his CDs. And I even went to my mom and I kind of like held the phone up so she could hear it, and she's like, it sounds just like the CDs. So Al and I discussed so many topics. I remember I had asked him if he had ever met Bob Lazar, and he said that he had wanted to meet Bob, but Bob didn't want to meet him. I asked him, you know, something had taken place where his children were taken away from him, and he wasn't allowed to see them, and he seemed kind of upset about that. His version of it, I don't know, you know, what the truth is, but I know he had wanted to see his children. Felt bad for him on that. I spoke to him about when he visited Mars. He said that all the records are, not all the records, but a lot of records are stored underground in Mars, and that he had to ride on golf carts to be able to travel around. because it was that big underground. I think I asked him about meeting Mark Hamill in Hawaii in the 50s. I don't remember what he said about that. He talked about Preston Nichols a little bit. And then I finally started discussing with him matters that he spoke about on his interview with Michael Halzager about the year 2137, about what he saw on television about present day. And so I said to him, I said, hey, listen, Al, on that interview, you had said that there would be a war at the beginning of the 21st century. I don't see any way a war could possibly start in a year and a half. And to give you an idea of the time period, we used to use portable cordless phones, and the batteries would get hot on them. And what was taking place in the news at the time was the Gary Condit Chandra Levy scandal. And people were still upset about the election of 2000 between Gore and Bush, even though there were 6 recounts and George Bush won the recount all 6 times. People were still kind of upset about it. Because this was a pre-9/11 world. I mean, literally the world was different. He had given a 2003 date, I believe, in that interview. And so I was just wondering, I was like, how is there going to be a war in a year and a half? And right now we're complaining about Chandra Levy and Gary Condit. And this is where the crazy part happens. He said, you will see the beginning of this war take place by the end of this year, when bin Laden and his boys blow up the World Trade Center. You'll see the beginnings of this war manifest by the end of this year, when bin Laden and his boys blow up the World Trade Center. And I said, hey Al, didn't they try doing that in like 1993 and didn't succeed at it? At the time I didn't really know who Osama bin Laden or Al Qaeda was. My reference of terrorism was the Libyans in Back to the Future, or the Iranians in one of the Cheech and Chong movies. I'm thinking of the Biggie Smalls song, Blow Up Like the World Trade, from the Biggie Smalls song, the Notorious B.I.G. song, when he says, blow up like the World Trade. And he said, well, no, they only blew up a floor. This time, both of the Twin Towers will fall, and Bush will send the world into a fussy by making nations choose sides in a supposed war on terror. Now, as normal of reality as that is to you now, let me tell you, when I was talking to him on the phone in 2001, pre-9/11, I thought that was the most absurd thing that anybody could tell me. He said that the Twin Towers, both of the Twin Towers, were going to fall. And it was going to be bin Laden and his boys. It might be hard for some to remember, but there was a time when you didn't hear about terrorism and terrorists every single day on television. I didn't even know who. The only time I had ever heard of Osama bin Laden was through a good friend of mine. When I was a senior in college, I had 21 credit hours, so I had to get rid of all my material possessions so nothing would distract me. I just had my clothing, toilet paper, toothbrush, and a phone. But I think the phone came with the dorm. And he would leave me voicemails all the time, because I was always in class, about bin Laden and the Al Qaeda network and that they're training to kill Americans. And to give you an idea of what I thought of terrorists, I thought of terrorists in pre-9/11. Terrorists were the guys in the yellow bus in Back to the Future. And so when Al said that bin Laden and his boys would blow up the World Trade Center by the end of the year, and both of the Twin Towers would fall, and Bush would send the world into a fussy by making nations choose sides in a supposed war on terror, that sounded so outlandishly ridiculous. So when he said that Bush would send the world into a fussy, he said the word fussy. It was so funny to hear the word fussy be used. Send the world into a fussy by making nations choose sides in a supposed war on terror. And I'm thinking, what is a supposed war on terror? Who could that be? So much so that I really wanted to hang up on him at the time. And then he said, oh, and also I had felt like at that point I felt bad because I hadn't done my homework. My good buddy was telling me about bin Laden and Al Qaeda, And I hadn't done any research to have a background on it because I just never cared about that. I was like, yeah, if there's any terrorism, U.S. military will mop them up. And so I felt like I wasn't qualified to speak to Al at that moment. Hearing such vagueness, which seemingly vague information as a supposed war on terror, I wanted to hang up the phone. I was like, this is absurd. This is like one of those, like psychics give you vague things. And I had felt like I had been listening to like a fortune teller. It sounded vague, but how specific was that, in retrospect? So then Al said an axis of evil will be defined. And I thought he had gotten confused with World War II, Philadelphia experiment, and present day. And I said, Al, are you sure you don't mean the Axis powers? And he said, no, that's World War II. That's Germany, Italy, Japan. I'm talking about a new axis of evil will be defined. And I said, well, who's going to be the axis of evil? He said it was going to be Iran, Iraq, North Korea, Syria, and Afghanistan. And I said, Afghanistan? I thought they were our friends. I just saw Rambo 3. Rambo helped the Mujahideen defeat the Soviets. I thought Afghanistan is our ally. And he said, no, in this case, they're not going to be. And I think he had said like either Germany or France, something with them they were going to be affected. So, and after the axis of evil will be defined, we are going to go to war with Iraq. And I said, Iraq? Iraq? Are you kidding me? Why? Iraq? I said, can they fight this time? Because in 1991, we fought Iraq, and I think won in 6 hours, and then Bill Clinton, during his impeachment process, dropped some bombs on medicine factories or something. Do they put up a fight this time? And he said, no, the capital of Baghdad will be conquered within a month. And so I said, well, what kind of a war is that? This is the big war of the 21st century that you're talking about? That's going to change everything? And he said, yeah, well, once Iraq is invaded, a bunch of resources are going to become available, and there's going to be a fight to like win the region and win the resources. And basically a whole lot of money is up for grabs. And money is power. And I was like, all right, so this is going to happen around 2003, right? Yeah. So I remember that. And I remember that he said that the Twin Towers, before the end of the year, were going to fall. Both Twin Towers. And Bush would send the world into a fussy by making nations choose sides in a supposed war on terror. Okay, now here's one that may or may not have happened. He said that in 2005, carnivorous aliens would attempt an invasion on the Earth, and that humans would become grist for the plates of the carnivorous aliens. But the United States Space Forces and Armed Forces would defeat them. Now, I think the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster happened in 2005, maybe? I gotta look that up. So maybe the Space Shuttle Challenger was about some alien stuff, who knows? The thing is, there was no visible carnivorous alien invasion to my knowledge on the planet. Maybe there were, and it just wasn't on the news. But he did say that was going to happen in 2005. At this point on the phone call, I was ready to hang up on him. In fact, like my hopes and my dreams of my hero were kind of shattered, and I was like, this guy's crazy. He told me that the Twin Towers are going to fall by the end of the year. He said we're going to have a war with Iraq in 2003, and an axis of evil will be defined, and there would be a supposed war on terror. You got to keep in context the time period. In retrospect, it's real easy to understand. That's part of history now, but at the time, it wasn't. And so I was like, "What? This is bananas." Now, fast forward to my first day of work. It was September 11, 2001 was my first day at work broadcasting the county commission meetings in Broward County. And it's my first time really driving by myself in rush hour traffic in downtown Fort Lauderdale. And the same buddy that left me all the messages about bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda network, my phone rings, my cell phone, and I'm like, nervous, I'm in rush hour for the first time in my life. and I'm trying to get to work on time, and it rings, and I'm like, what? I pick it up, I go, dude, the world better be ending, man, because it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Why would he be calling me? And he goes, hey, dude, don't hang up, bro. The world might be, something's going on here. Some idiot just flew an airplane into the Twin Towers, into one of the Twin Towers. And I said, okay, great, whatever, hung up. And then he calls again, he goes, hey, bro, I know you need to get to work, but you need to listen to this. Another plane flew into another Twin Tower. And I'm thinking, okay, that's pretty weird, but I still got to get to work on time. So then I get to park it in the parking garage, and he calls again. He goes, hey, listen, I really think something serious is going on here. The Pentagon just got hit with something. We might be under attack. And that's pretty strange. And I'm wondering if Al Bielek had mentioned the Pentagon too. He might have. And you got to keep in mind too, when I talked to him on the phone, I wasn't into government conspiracies. I only cared about extraterrestrials. That's it. ET and free energy. And so I'm thinking, wow, the Pentagon just got hit? That's like a national icon. And I'm walking into work and all these people are leaving. They're like running out of the building or walking really fast. And I'm thinking of like advice my dad told me, son, if you ever see people running in one direction and you're going in the opposite, you may want to change your direction. I get to work, and it was a broadcast job. And so all the TV sets had the disaster as it was happening. And it was just a really strange moment. And I started, all the stuff Al Bielek told me a couple months earlier started coming to my mind. And after I saw all this take place, you know, I was caught up in the whole moment of the patriotism and whatnot. But at the same time, I was like, Al Bielek told me this was going to happen. And so once I saw that happen, and I didn't believe him. I really didn't believe that the Twin Towers were going to fall before the end of the year. And so at that point, I started telling everybody about this 2003 Iraq war that he told me about. Just to let it be known that, hey, some guy out there knows this is all going to happen. So that's my story of my conversation with Al Bielek in 2001 before 9/11. Everything he told me, minus the carnivorous alien thing, it all came true. The Twin Towers fell before the end of the year. Bush did send the world into a fussy by making nations choose sides in a supposed war on terror. An axis of evil was defined. We did invade Iraq and conquer the capital of Baghdad within a month. And that's a lot of stuff. I mean, he told me, the conversation was about 2.5 hours long. He told me all that within the span of, 8 minutes. I wish I recorded the whole phone conversation because it was filled with gold. Most of it I didn't even believe. And so he says he's seen underground record storage at Mars, met Alpha Centaurians, traveled through time, met 13 alien races. And my point is, there's a lot of websites out there debunking Al Bielek, saying that he's full of it. You just have to know how to talk to him. Now, Al Bielek's passed away. He's not alive anymore for you to try this. But the way he would interact with you, it would be like you would trigger memories in his mind. So you had to say key trigger words, and then he would speak for about 3 minutes on something. So anyway, Al Bielek told me about 9/11 before it happened, told me about the Iraq War before it happened. He knew specific details of things that I don't know how he could have possibly known that unless he had either inside information or maybe he really did time travel to the year 2137 and watched History Channel or the equivalent in the year 2137 where he learned about the history of the United States from the 21st century on to the year to their present time of 2137. Who knows? But the phone call actually did happen. Echelon probably has it recorded somewhere. Somewhere there's an AT&T long distance bill that proves I talked to him. Michael Halzager could tell you I spoke with him. And I had been talking about this topic since I talked to Al Bielek on the phone. This is just the first time I made a video about it. For those that don't know, Al Bielek claims that he time traveled when he jumped off the USS Eldridge in World War II as the person Edward Cameron. So he wasn't Al Bielek, he was Edward Cameron. And he jumped off the USS Eldridge with his brother Duncan Cameron. And when they jumped off during the Philadelphia experiment, they wound up traveling through time where they ended up in the year 2137. He spent 6 weeks there in a hospital where he watched television, and he said that television had, it wasn't like TV like we have now. Television back then, television in the future is like all Discovery Channel type things where it's just historical and educational. And then he went, after spending 6 weeks in 2137, he then went to the year 2749, spent 2 years there as a tour guide, and he said that most of the cities are like floating cities. And then he went back to 2137, I think, to get Duncan, and then they ended up in the year 1983, where they ran into John von Neumann, who was kind of the head of the Philadelphia experiment. And John von Neumann had aged 40 years, but they had only aged like 8, they being Duncan and Edward, aka Al Bielek. And then at that point, John von Neumann sent them back to 1943 to destroy the Philadelphia experiment so that it never happened on our timeline, if you believe in the multiverse theory. Afterwards, they had to extract Edward Cameron's soul and implant it in Al Bielek, the child. There was a child named Al Bielek, and apparently Al Bielek, the original child, had his body hijacked for Edward Cameron's soul. And Al Bielek said that, Edward Cameron, aka Al Bielek, said that his mom knew that her original child's body had been like hijacked by Edward Cameron's spirit. And then in the future, Al Bielek as Al Bielek, or Edward Cameron as Al Bielek, the guy that we know, was part of the Montauk Project with Preston Nichols and I guess Stuart Swerdlow and others from, I think, the years 1976 to 1983, and they ran all kinds of experiments. If you like this story and you want to hear more stories like this, like and subscribe to my channel. This is the Jonathan Lippy channel, and I have another channel called Technuba. Thank you for watching, and may the force be with you.